Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take the most complex and sprawling source material and distill it into potent, memorable insights tailored just for you.
Hello again.
Today we are undertaking a truly massive intellectual endeavor. We're comparing two theoretical behemoths that seek nothing less than a unified theory of the human mind.
That's right. We are diving deep into the unified theory of memory, consciousness, and learning, or TUMCA,
And on the other side, the mathematically rigorous framework of active inference, or AI.
which itself stands on the foundation of the free energy principle, or FEP. So a lot of acronyms today.
A lot of acronyms, but a spectacular clash of ideas. It's a fascinating journey into, I guess you'd call it, radical reductionism.
Absolutely. Our source material, curated under the expertise of Professor Rubens Godoy Sampaio, it really forces us to confront the nature of the mind through two profoundly different lenses.
So you have TUMCA, which tries to solve consciousness by rooting it entirely in the biological function of memory.
And then you have active inference, which tries to explain all adaptive behavior, perception, action, learning everything, really through a single unifying mathematical principle.
Minimization of surprise.
It's the minimization of surprise. So our mission today is to thoroughly unpack the claims, the convergences, and the irreconcilable divergences of these two colossal structures.
Okay, let's unpack this monumental challenge. Why are we even doing this? The sources immediately set the stage by calling the problem of consciousness incommensurable.
Yeah, it's described as a modern-day David versus Goliath battle.
And it's this paradox of overwhelming complexity, the sheer magnitude of the mystery, that weirdly fuels the search for a devastatingly simple, unifying solution.
It does. The necessity for a unifying framework comes directly from what the sources call a proliferation of theories.
Right.
The material references estimates, I think, from Trapicchio, suggesting that the mind-brain problem has spawned nearly 100 distinct theoretical approaches.
100. Think about that. 100 different ways to describe how we think.
And these theories are all over the map. Historically, we simplify them.
Dualist versus monist.
Sure, substance dualism, property dualism, materialism, emergentism, all of that. But even within the scientific camp, the divisions are severe. Candle's taxonomy shows this really well.
So Candle forces a choice. Right. Is consciousness a discrete, separable operation, like a dedicated circuit or center?
Which is the view of people like Crick, Koch, Searle, Damasio, Edelman, a lot of heavy hitters.
Is it merely the result of generalized computational activity across large associative areas of the brain?
Exactly. And the fact that there's no consensus among people like that just shows that something fundamental is missing.
And that missing piece is the unifying principle. This brings us to the core imperative of both TUMCA and active inference.
Right. For TUMCA, the goal is deeply philosophical. It demands we overcome dualism once and for all by building a unified theory that centers everything, every single cognitive function on memory.
And the first step, according to the sources, is strictly theoretical. It's about resolving the consciousness problem by establishing memory's absolute centrality.
In contrast, the imperative for active inference is mathematically normative. It doesn't start with a biological function like memory. It starts with a guiding principle for any system that adapts and persists.
So its appeal is that it provides one single mechanism.
One mechanism minimizing surprise to reconcile perception, attention, learning, and motor control. All these things that are usually studied in isolation across psychology, neuroscience, and AI research.
Which brings us to their radical reductionist goals. And they couldn't be more direct in their attempts to simplify the universe of the mind.
Well, for TUMCA, the reduction is famously stark. Consciousness is strictly reduced to memory.
Strictly.
It asserts that memory is the brain's primordial, most sophisticated function. The difference between you consciously experiencing this conversation and you recalling a fact from 10 years ago is not a difference in fundamental structure.
It's just a difference of degree.
A difference of degree, of intensity, of recursivity.
Okay, so if TUMCA reduces consciousness to memory, active inference reduces all behavior to what it calls self-evidencing.
Precisely. The free energy principle, FEP, it postulates that the purpose of any biological system is to maintain its structural and functional integrity. It has to avoid surprising changes.
So all action is determined by minimizing this surprise.
By minimizing what's called variational free energy, the organism guarantees it only visits its characteristic preferred states. It maintains homeostasis or allostasis.
It's constantly seeking evidence that it exists.
And that it exists as this particular organism. It's a powerful idea.
It is a powerful starting point. TUMCA posits a biological route for unification, and AI posits a mathematical route. Let's dedicate the necessary time now to fully explore the revolutionary claims of the Teoria Unificata da Memoria, the TUMCA framework.
Let's do it.
So the first and most crucial step in TUMCA is this: elimination of the false problem of consciousness. It does this by asserting the absolute non-negotiable centrality of memory.
And this is a claim that really rewrites the foundations of philosophy. It's a radical statement.
How so?
The source material argues that memory is the sine qua non, the indispensable condition for all higher cognitive functions. That includes reason and even our very experience of linear time.
You can't reason or plan or solve a problem without retrieving and combining memories.
You just can't. The Cartesian formulation, I think, therefore I am, is totally replaced with the central axiom of TUMCA. I remember, therefore I think.
Lembro logo penso.
Exactly. Without the ability to remember, there is no substrate for thought. It's that simple.
So consciousness is labeled a non-problem. And this isn't just a semantic trick, is it? It's arguing that our relentless insistence on treating consciousness as something superior.
Something magically emergent or distinct from memory.
That insistence has actively paralyzed the integration of neurosciences and psychological theories. We've been looking for a dedicated structure that just isn't there.
And to give this argument real philosophical weight, the author places the TUMCA thesis squarely in the tradition of anthropocentric humiliations.
Ah, this is one of the most intellectually provocative claims in the sources.
It is. The great shifts in human thought, Copernicus removing the Earth from the cosmic center, Darwin removing humans from biological privilege, they all force us to confront our lack of unique specialness.
And the current humiliation is the removal of consciousness, free will, and the self from their unique pedestal.
Exactly. TUMCA compares the stubborn insistence on these concepts to obsolete scientific entities, like phlogiston.
The mythical substance of fire.
Right, or Ptolemaic epicycles, those ridiculously complex circles used to explain celestial movements, or the luminiferous ether.
So these concepts are hypostatized. They're abstract labels that we mistakenly treat as real, separate things.
We reify them. We shouldn't ask where the consciousness center is any more than we should ask for the phlogiston generator. It's the wrong question.
Okay, if we accept this radical reduction, what happens to the most cherished hypostasis of all? The self. The ego, identity.
TUMCA handles the self by reducing it entirely to the dynamic, interwoven structure of biographical memory.
So the self is not a distinct psychic manager.
No, it's the entire tapestry of your stored life experiences. The analogy they provide is simple but really powerful: the index of a book.
Okay.
The index is materially identical to every other page, same paper, same ink, but it has a specific recursive indicative function.
It points back to the book's contents.
Exactly. The self is just the mechanism of memory pointing back to itself, referencing its own content.
And the pathological evidence here, it supports this claim brilliantly.
Oh, absolutely. The cases of Henry Molaison, H.M., and Clive Waring are crucial evidence for TUMCA.
So H.M., after his surgery, he couldn't form new declarative memories.
Right, catastrophic damage to his hippocampus. But he retained his older autobiographical memories and could exhibit minimal consciousness and attention. His sense of self, though fractured, it still persisted because his historical memory was still accessible.
Now, compare that to Clive Waring, whose case was just devastating.
Far more devastating due to herpes encephalitis. Waring wholly lives in a permanent present. He's constantly rebooting his existence every 30 seconds.
He still has procedural memories, though, right? He can conduct music.
Flawlessly. He can read, write, conduct music. But his autobiographical memory is obliterated. So what did he lose? He lost the self, and he lost the continuous experience of time.
For TUMCA, this is undeniable proof.
It has to be. The absence of specific high-level memories destroys the self, but the continued functioning of basic memory circuits ensures a minimal level of consciousness, which is just basic memory activation.
Okay, so if the self is reduced to biographical memory, we now need to understand the engine that makes this memory reflexive and conscious. And that engine is recursivity.
Recursivity is the key. It's the move that solves the consciousness problem for TUMCA. Consciousness, particularly its reflective aspect, the ability to be aware that you are aware, is memory folding back on itself.
Remembering other memory?
Remembering other memories. It's continuous, self-referential cognitive feedback loop, the looping cognitivo.
Let's spend a moment on the analogies provided because they make this abstract concept really concrete. First, the paper airplane.
The paper airplane analogy is great because it just nails the non-dualistic nature of the relationship. Consciousness is to memory as the paper airplane is to the paper.
The airplane is only paper. It doesn't need new material.
No new material, no special substance. Its ability to fly or glide emerges entirely from the folding of the base material upon itself.
So all cognitive functions are just specialized foldings of the one core material memory.
Exactly. We are not a Swiss Army knife with separate modules for attention, planning, and memory. We're a single sheet of paper folded in complex ways.
I like that. Okay, what about the circle analogy?
The circle is about emergent complexity. So you take a simple 30-centimeter line, which represents linear memory traces. You join the ends recursively, and you create a circle.
Okay.
And from that simple circle, all the incredible complexity of geometry, trigonometry, and the transcendental mystery of pi emerges. The circle is just a line recursively joined, but its mathematical power is transformative.
And the complexity of mental life emerges from the recursive nature of 86 billion neurons remembering themselves.
That's the idea.
And the third analogy, the bath, that addresses the ghost in the machine critique directly.
The bath metaphor is designed to refute the homunculus, the little man inside your head running the show.
The manager.
The manager. When you're asked to explain consciousness, you're asked how the mind can reflect on itself without this ghostly manager. TUMCA says this confusion happens because we ignore the recursive nature of the system.
How can you wash your own back and feet?
Because your arms are long enough to reach. They're part of the recursive body folding back on itself. Without memory's recursivity, we'd be forced to postulate an infinite chain of managers, a ghost in the machine to handle the reflection.
That's a perfect encapsulation of how a structural property, recursivity, fundamentally solves what seems like a philosophical problem.
And the sources even trace this recursivity back to the very beginning of our biology.
The genetic blueprint itself.
Yes, the formation of the neural tube in the embryo involves tissue folding back and curving over itself. This foundational recursivity is preserved in our bilateral symmetry and, crucially, in the structural capacity of memory circuits to self-fold and self-reference.
Let's tie this pure concept of recursive memory into specific cognitive functions. How does something like working memory or attention relate to this single unified structure?
So working memory, the memory we use for immediate tasks, it acts as the critical interface between perception and long-term memory. TUMCA defines consciousness as memory functioning in an active, processual, and continuous way.
It's memory in flux. Memory in flux. And attention gets a wonderfully simple definition here.
Which is?
Attention is defined as memory in slow motion.
Memory in slow motion.
It's a concentrated, active use of memory, constrained to focusing on very few things. The sources suggest maybe 4 to 7 items. When you are paying attention, you are simply allocating your continuous active memory processing to a highly restricted, focused set of data.
And the intensity, the vividness of being conscious.
It's just highly activated memory. It's impossible under the TUMCA framework to be conscious of something without simultaneously remembering something. The sound you just heard, the word you're processing, the current state of your body.
So the flashes we call consciousness are just the most vivid or intensely activated subsets of memory.
That's the claim.
Wow. Okay, we've established the deep philosophical reductionism of TUMCA, rooting everything in biological history and structure. Now we have to pivot to active inference,
which attempts unification not through biology, but through a purely mathematical and physical imperative. This is where we need to slow down and build the context for concepts like the free energy principle.
Active inference is truly an ambitious general-purpose framework. It treats the free energy principle, FEP, as a foundational axiom, a normative principle that applies to all self-organizing systems.
Whether it's a single cell or a human brain.
Right. And the core mandate, as we said earlier, is the minimization of surprise.
Let's clarify surprise first, because it's a technical term, not an emotion.
It's very technical. In statistics and information theory, surprise is the negative log evidence. It's the likelihood of observing your current sensory data given your internal model of the world.
Okay, give me an example.
Imagine your internal model predicts the room temperature is a comfortable 70 degrees. If you suddenly observe a temperature of 100 degrees, your model fails spectacularly. The marginal evidence for that observation is low, and your system experiences high surprise.
And FEP states that life must minimize this surprise, which is equivalent to minimizing the variational free energy, or $5.
Correct. Minimizing $5 a row is what guarantees self-evidencing. The very act of living is predicated on maintaining a stable boundary with your environment.
So if an organism consistently samples states that are highly improbable according to its internal model,
It ceases to be that organism, like a mammal whose body temperature drops to freezing. Minimizing free energy is mathematically necessary for the organism to persist within its characteristic homeostatic bounds. It is the drive to be what you are.
this principle also acts as a kind of mathematical realization of Occam's razor. How does minimizing $5 relate to choosing the simplest explanation?
So $5 minimization enforces a crucial balance, the complexity-accuracy trade-off. To minimize free energy, the organism must find the best explanation for its sensory data,
So it needs a model that is accurate.
but also parsimonious. It has to have minimal complexity. If you create an infinitely complex internal model that perfectly explains every single data point, the computational cost is infinite, the model is useless. $5 finds the optimal point where the model is just complex enough to be accurate without being intractable.
The entire active inference framework is rooted in the Bayesian brain hypothesis, the idea that the brain is constantly performing probabilistic inference.
Constantly, it's always trying to figure out the causes of its sensory input. It uses Bayes' rule to update its posterior beliefs by combining its prior beliefs with the likelihood of the data.
But performing exact Bayesian inference in a system as vast as the brain is.
Computationally impossible. It's intractable.
And this is where the variational part of variational free energy comes in.
Exactly. Variational inference is an approximation. Instead of computing the exact complex posterior distribution, AI minimizes the free energy, $5, which serves as an upper bound on the surprise.
So by minimizing $5, the organism is minimizing the distance between its best guess and the true complex reality.
It's variational posterior and the true posterior, yes. This approximation makes the system viable and introduces subjectivity. Your reality is constrained by the limitations and assumptions of your internal generative model.
Let's move to the physical mechanisms. How does active inference explain action and perception?
Perception and action are two sides of the same coin, error minimization. In predictive coding theory, which is the process theory for active inference, the brain constantly generates top-down predictions about what sensory input it expects.
And when the actual sensory input arrives, any mismatch generates a bottom-up prediction error.
Right. So perception is the minimization of prediction error by updating the internal model.
If the prediction error is high, the model must be updated to better explain the data.
And action is the minimization of prediction error by changing the world, or at least changing your relationship with the world. Action is the fulfillment of proprioceptive predictions.
So if your brain predicts your hand will be at position X, but it's at Y.
The difference generates a prediction error. The motor system automatically adjusts descending motor signals until the hand reaches position X, fulfilling the prediction and minimizing the error. Action is the realization of predictions.
Okay, let's tie this back to cognition. Where does attention, which TUMCA called memory in slow motion, fit into this mathematical framework?
Active inference defines attention formally as precision.
Precision.
Precision is a measure of confidence in a probability distribution, and it acts as a multiplicative weight on the prediction errors.
So if you're highly confident or precise about a signal,
That signal's prediction errors should carry more weight in updating your beliefs or driving action.
can you give us a conversational example of adjusting precision?
Sure. Imagine you're trying to hold a quiet conversation in a loud coffee shop. You are actively increasing the precision, the weight, assigned to the auditory prediction errors related to speech.
And simultaneously suppressing the precision of everything else.
The visual distractions of people walking by, the general noise errors, you're focusing the predictive power of your model. Data that is afforded high precision is weighted heavily, and that is what we subjectively experience as attention.
The sources also note the frequent confusion between attention and salience.
They're related outcomes of FEP. While attention is precision, salience is associated with the expected value of information.
The potential for resolving uncertainty.
Exactly. And highly precise observations are typically minimally ambiguous, meaning they're rich in information. So data that is highly precise is both salient, high information gain, and afforded attention, or high weighting.
Finally, how does AI handle complex, forward-looking thought, like planning? That seems to go beyond just immediate error correction.
Planning involves considering possible future observations under different courses of action or policies. This is handled by minimizing the expected free energy, or EFE.
So EFE extends the free energy principle into the future.
Exactly. It enables the system to choose the policy that will lead to the minimal surprise over the long term.
And this EFE minimization elegantly dissolves the age-old behavioral psychology problem of exploration versus exploitation.
It does. The expected free energy naturally decomposes into two components that reflect this trade-off. First, there's the epistemic value. This is the drive to explore.
An expected information gain.
Right. The policy that resolves the most uncertainty has high epistemic value. Second, there's the pragmatic value. This is the drive to exploit. It involves seeking preferred outcomes, where those preferences are encoded as prior beliefs about desirable states.
So the optimal policy finds a balance.
It minimizes the total EFE, ensuring the organism gathers enough knowledge through exploration to accurately predict how to reach its preferred persistent states through exploitation. It's a completely unified approach to decision-making.
We now have two massive, competing reductionist frameworks. TUMCA reduces everything to memory and its recursivity.
Rooted in history and biology.
And AI reduces everything to the mathematical imperative of minimizing surprise.
Rooted in probability and inference.
And yet, they share crucial ground, particularly around this idea of the internal model.
For active inference, the generative model is essential. It's the subjective hypothesis the organism holds about how its sensations are generated. The survival of the organism, its self-evidencing, absolutely depends on this model being a good representation of the external world.
But here we find intense intellectual friction because TUMCA fundamentally objects to the term internal model itself.
Yes. TUMCA launches a powerful critique, arguing that concepts like internalized models, as proposed by neuroscientists like Daheen, are a philosophical duplication of reality.
How so?
Well, if you say the brain stores a model of a chair, TUMCA asks, what is that model made of? It must be made of memories. So postulating a separate model violates Occam's razor.
So for TUMCA, an internalized model is simply the result of memorizing something.
A schematic, abbreviated, stylized representation of the world. Problem-solving capacity, therefore, is a memory, not some separate computational structure managing a model.
This friction is part of TUMCA's general skepticism toward computational metaphors for the brain.
Right. TUMCA explicitly pushes back against the anachronistic habit of comparing the brain to the latest technology, a hydraulic pump, an electrical switchboard, or today, a quantum computer.
The life process, according to TUMCA, is not computational, it's historical.
Its structure and function depend on genetic memory and learned cumulative memories. Any problem-solving ability stems from mixing existing memorized knowledge, not from some abstract, standalone computational algorithm.
The next point of convergence is in the necessity of imperfection and plasticity. TUMCA actually champions the imperfection of memory as an advantage.
This is a beautiful point. If memory were perfect like in that Borges story, Funes the Memorious, who remembered every leaf on every tree,
You'd be incapable of generalization, abstraction, or conceptual thought.
Exactly. The genius of biological memory is that neuronal networks are sensitive to similar, inexact stimuli. This imperfection allows for generalization. Memory is optimal precisely because it is imperfect.
And this imperfection feeds the process of generativity.
Yes. Creativity and language are not separate modules. They are possible because the recursivity of memory allows for the combination of imperfect memory traces. Novelty and unexpected ideas emerge from combining two or more distinct imperfect memories.
The system doesn't need a magical creativity engine.
It just needs to be able to recursively recombine imperfect elements.
Both theories must also align with the biological reality of learning and synaptic plasticity, Hebb's rule.
For TUMCA, learning is simply fixing content in the brain through training, rehearsal, successful retrieval. It's a basic human instinct. The strengthening of synaptic connections ensures that neurons that fire together stay together, ready to be reactivated whenever a similar stimulus occurs.
And active inference provides the mathematical justification for this.
Right. In the AI paradigm, learning is the long-term optimization of the parameters of the generative model. In biological terms, it's adjusting synaptic efficacy.
And that optimization must adhere to core Hebbian principles.
Cooperativity, associativity, and synaptic specificity, AI demonstrates that optimizing model parameters via error minimization inherently requires these biological plasticity rules.
Okay, we can't avoid the final, most speculative convergence.
Right.
The connection between memory and life itself, which really skirts the edge of panpsychism.
It does. TUMCA makes the fundamental claim that memory is anterior to life, or at least that life cannot exist without memory. Even the last universal common ancestor, LUCA, possessed genetic memory in its DNA and basic molecular memory.
So memory is a precondition for biological adaptation.
Yes. But despite this universal application of the concept, the author of TUMCA emphatically denies being a panpsychist.
This is a vital distinction.
Very. The author rejects the existence of a psyche, a non-material mind or spirit. Mental life is just a label we assign to the brain's capacity to remember. Panpsychism is dismissed as another example of that hypostatizing theory, installing a magical property into matter that violates Occam's razor.
So it's a universal nemism, not a universal spirit.
Exactly. It's the fundamental capacity to encode and retrieve state, which, when you couple it with recursivity, intermittently generates consciousness.
And active inference echoes this continuity, but through the lens of physics.
Right. AI applies the FEP across a continuum of complexity, a bacterium moving toward glucose, a plant adjusting its leaves to the sun, a human planning a career. They're all mathematically constrained by the same principle.
Minimizing surprise.
Minimizing surprise. The sophistication of the organism's generative model evolves with its structure, but the guiding principle is unified across all adaptive systems, simple and complex.
We've seen where these giants overlap, but their core intellectual contributions are defined by their differences. We have to now bring the two theories into direct conflict, analyzing their opposing views on ontology and mechanism.
The clash starts with the nature of the mind itself. TUMCA offers an absolute ontological reduction. Consciousness does not exist as a separate entity.
It is the recursivity of memory.
It's a linguistic artifact, a ghost we created with language.
Active inference, coming from a mathematical tradition, has a slightly softer ontological stance.
AI is a normative framework. It's focused on function and constraint. While it doesn't solve the hard problem of subjective experience, it provides rigorous definitions for the cognitive building blocks often associated with consciousness.
So attention is precision.
Salience is expected information gain. It defines how an organism operates optimally, leaving the emergent phenomenal experience to be explained by associated theories, like the global neural workspace, which AI can constrain.
What about the self? We know TUMCA views the self as purely biographical memory. But AI's reliance on the generative model introduces a structure that TUMCA criticizes.
The generative model is the subjective hypothesis that AI needs to operate. It's the core of self-evidencing. Without a model of self and not self, the system can't minimize surprise and persist.
From AI's perspective, it's a necessary mathematical postulate.
But TUMCA views this as redundant, arguing the generative model is nothing more than the organized memories themselves. It violates Occam's razor by adding an unnecessary layer of structure. This is a critical divergence, necessity versus parsimony.
Let's break down the functional mechanisms, starting with action and behavior. For TUMCA, action is primarily memory-driven management.
Yes, TUMCA sees action as the deployment of memory, specifically its recursive capacity, to manage future outcomes. The source material even describes language as an abbreviated motor behavior.
So speech is a highly refined, internalized action based on learned motor memories.
Exactly. Action is teleological driven by a future desired state, which is retrieved from memory.
In contrast, AI sees action as immediate sensory correction.
For active inference, action is the minimization of free energy through fulfilling proprioceptive predictions. It's not driven by abstract future management. It's driven by the immediate error signal between the expected sensory input and the actual sensory input.
It's a continuous error-driven feedback loop, highly mechanized and automatic. How about learning and memory?
TUMCA views learning as fixation. Fixing content in the brain through repeated training and powerful evocation. It's quantitative and cumulative. The key example is the constraint of working memory. We're limited to a small number of items.
So learning is the cumulative increase in the types of items we can recall.
Supported by external tools like writing.
And for AI,
Learning is optimization. It's the continuous process of adjusting the parameters of the generative model's synaptic efficacy to minimize prediction errors over the long term. It's a process of refinement and structural adjustment, not purely cumulative increase.
so TUMCA emphasizes the storage and retrieval quantity.
While AI emphasizes the accuracy and efficiency of the predictive model.
And finally, the economy of processing. How do these theories handle the brain's computational load?
TUMCA argues that recursivity decreases the computational burden. By folding memory over itself, the system achieves self-excitability and rapid execution, avoiding the need for continuous external management,
And offloading cognitive labor onto things like writing.
which makes the system profoundly efficient.
AI achieves its economy through variational inference.
Exactly. Since exact Bayesian inference is impossible, minimizing free energy, or $5, provides the necessary approximation. It's an approach designed from the ground up to handle the intractability of complex systems.
Moving to the macro scale, let's consider the evolutionary implications, starting with TUMCA's perspective on the unique leap made by Homo sapiens.
TUMCA is clear. The decisive evolutionary advantage for our species was the radical expansion of memory utilization, and it co-evolved incrementally with bipedalism, the opposable thumb, and, crucially, language.
This emphasis on cumulative, tiny changes over vast timescales is necessary to combat the retrospective fallacy.
The tendency to look at complex outcomes like consciousness or language and postulate a sudden magical origin, ignoring the slow accumulation of biological advantage.
So what were the key factors that accelerated this memory advantage?
3 things stand out. First, the quantity of terms maintained in working memory. That seemingly small biological difference, the capacity to hold 4 to 7 items simultaneously, was a colossal advantage for planning, tool-making, communication.
Second, the capacity for cultural transmission.
Through oral tradition, this allowed memory to be transmitted across generations in large groupings, dramatically shortening the learning curve for survival and accelerating cultural accumulation.
And the third factor, the real game changer, was the invention of external storage.
The invention of writing. This technological advance made memory perennial, independent of the biological organism, and infinitely scalable. Writing allowed humans to perform complex operations like multiplying large numbers by offloading cognitive load from working memory onto paper.
It's the ultimate recursive memory tool in the TUMCA view.
It absolutely is.
We must also address the scientific requirement of testability. Is TUMCA's radical philosophical reduction actually falsifiable?
It is, and the author lays out the mechanism clearly. To refute TUMCA, you'd have to demonstrate definitively using tools like fMRI that the neuronal correlates activated during any higher function, like intelligence or volition, are entirely different from the neuronal correlates of memory when those functions are in use.
And TUMCA's thesis predicts that this functional segregation will never be found.
Because all higher functions simply recruit existing recursive memory circuits.
Active inference, being a mathematical framework, has inherent testability through computational modeling.
Right. AI provides a framework for modeling complex behaviors. For example, in perception and attention, it can model things like visual saccades, the rapid, involuntary eye movements. The optimal saccade is the one that maximizes the expected reduction in uncertainty.
So the model predicts the precise path the eyes must take to gather the most information with the least effort.
And it applies to complex decision-making, like navigation and learning.
Using those POMDPs, the Markov decision processes?
Yes. To model discrete tasks, like a subject choosing a path through a maze. The selection of the policy is guided entirely by minimizing the expected free energy, balancing the gain of new knowledge against the drive to reach preferred reward states.
It even bridges to systems neuroscience.
Through continuous models, it can parameterize the dynamics of temporal sequencing and movement. It can model how the brain handles tasks involving a delay period, showing how the brain is constantly minimizing error in its predictions of when and where the next event will occur.
This brings us back to the most provocative question: the future of recursive machines and consciousness. If recursivity is the engine of consciousness, what does that mean for today's sophisticated AI?
Well, TUMCA speculates that advanced machines, because of their vast memory capacity, are already solving problems that were once the exclusive domain of humans.
And when a machine achieves logical or physical self-organization, when it can reference its own code, its own processes, it becomes recursively organized.
At that point, the author of TUMCA suggests AIs may become partially conscious.
Partially conscious. What does that even entail?
It means they evidence a degree of recursivity, the capacity of large language models to talk about their own operational constraints, their training data, their internal processes. That's seen as evidence of a minimal degree of self-referential capacity.
A basic folding back of memory on itself.
Exactly.
However, current AI technology itself acknowledges the practical limits of deep recursion.
Oh, absolutely. Engineers point to real-world limitations: finite maximum stack depth, immense computational complexity, and the continuous need for human control. Current AI lacks the structural independence to autonomously self-program or self-repair its fundamental code.
So that limits true, deep self-reference. It separates a tool that talks about itself from a system that thinks about itself.
A critical distinction.
We've traveled from the purely philosophical to the purely mathematical, comparing two profound attempts to unify our understanding of the mind. The final, unifying thought presented by PUMCA is to simply demand a radical shift in our language.
hmm The author concludes that we must replace the vague, hypostatized, culturally loaded word mind with the precise, foundational, and testable word memory.
By placing memory at the center, making it the sun and the Copernican system of the brain, it facilitates a more accurate and integrated approach to all mental processes.
And it strips away centuries of dualistic baggage.
This has been an incredibly detailed exploration into the philosophical and mechanistic heart of cognition, contrasting the biological reductionism of TUMCA with the mathematical reductionism of active inference.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. We sincerely hope this deep dive provides you with the sophisticated tools needed to evaluate the next theoretical claim you encounter about the nature of the mind.
Remember that whether you approach the brain as a historical record striving for recursivity or as a continuous system striving for prediction error minimization, both roads lead away from the ghost and the machine and toward a unified, elegant explanation of what it means to be alive and aware.
We encourage you to reflect on your own life's narrative. If yourself is just an index of memories, what is the next memory you intend to write?
This material, curated by Professor Rubens Godoy Sampaio, is exclusive to the Philosophilics subscribers.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.